Hey my students, how you doing? Hope you having good day. In this video, I'm gonna talk about my student Deku. What if Deku unlocked the ancient pirate quirk? So what will happen if some strong enemy or ally were your opponents? Watch till end. And subscribe for more, also like this video, it helps me to stay motivated. And don't forget to check it author of the story and show some love. Name of this fanfic is The King of Heroes by NIMO2314. So do check out the author of this story and check out entire work. Also if you have any complaints about videos, feel free to comment, I will try to improve them. Let's jump in video. The Great Pirate Era ended thousands of years ago, and over time, humanity lost nearly all documents from 3,700 years prior. Scientists and historians concluded that a seventh major extinction event occurred, resulting in the world sinking into the ocean. They theorized that chemicals in the sea erased all traces of documents and life, assuming that almost all humans had perished, though some managed to survive. There are tales of humans with wings, evidenced by a story carved into a metal box yet to be identified by science. Despite various theories, historians in the early 2000s discovered human corpses with developed wings. It was presumed that these wings were no longer capable of flight. These humans were considered the last evidence of humanity 3,700 years ago. Based on archaeological evidence, one man theorized that these humans lived in the sky, migrating to land once it was safe after tidal waves subsided. Though many dismissed him as mad, he turned out to be correct. The last remaining humans from 3,700 years ago lived in the sky. After the first recorded quirk and the subsequent rise of quirks in human history, chaos ensued as 80% of society developed quirks. Amidst this, a man named Shigaraki emerged, using his quirk to manipulate Japan from the shadows. However, his brother opposed his actions, leading to a conflict where Shigaraki gifted his brother a stockpile quirk. This awakened his actual quirk, which then combined and creating One for All. This power was passed down through generations in hopes of defeating All for One. As quirk-enhanced crimes rose, vigilantes emerged, and countries passed legislation regulating quirks, leading to the development of professional heroes. 7 generations after One for All's creation, the modern-day Society of Heroes rose, including Nana Shimura, the seventh wielder of One for All. Meanwhile, Shigaraki, known as All for One, influenced villains across Japan. Nana Shimura mentored a quirkless boy named Yagi Toshinori, making him the eighth wielder of One for All. Tragically, Nana's husband was killed, leading her to give her son up for adoption to spare him from a similar fate. Yagi Toshinori, now 18, faced All for One alongside Nana, resulting in her sacrifice. Years later, after graduating from UA, Yagi Toshinori debuted as All Might, the #1 hero and symbol of peace. He found his sidekick, Night Eye, while All for One took on a new apprentice, Tomuro Shigaraki, Nana's grandson. 6 years before Midoriya begins at UA, All for One was defeated by All Might, forcing him to retreat. However, All Might was severely injured after the fight, limiting his use of One for All, and leading to dissolution of his partnership with Night Eye. In this time All for One created the League of Villains. Before we get into all of that mess, let's pause the story there. Because there's an even bigger story to tell. The story of the man who brought a new era to society. The man was known as. At the start of the 22nd century, science progressed alongside quirks. Scientists found that quirks are special particles that change in specific ways and have electric charges, similar to those in the standard model of particle physics. Since quirks are passed down genetically, siblings often have similar quirks. Many theories suggest a link between events 3,700 years ago and quirks. But it hasn't been proven yet. The first recorded instance of superhuman ability emerged when a newborn baby in King City, China, demonstrated the power to emit light from its body. Following this event, people worldwide began exhibiting various superpowers, not only at birth but also during puberty. These abilities came to be known as meta-abilities. The cause of this phenomenon remains a mystery. One research team suggested it might be linked to the spread of a previously unknown disease carried by mice, while others proposed it as a natural evolution of humanity. However, as of now, there is no concrete evidence supporting any of these hypotheses. This research group stated publicly that individuals with meta-abilities represent a distinct subset of humanity with unique genetic traits. And the same man who proposed that humans lived in the sky 3,700 years ago also put forward the idea that the appearance of quirks was driven by the desire for human evolution. I want to be this or I want to do that. Essentially, people wishing to become something different or better. According to his theory, quirks represent the manifestations of past human aspirations for evolution. He suggested that perhaps a similar phenomenon occurred 3,700 years ago, potentially leading to the sinking of the world into the ocean. He concluded that nature holds a disdain for supernatural abilities, hence imposing weaknesses or limitations on every quirk. Furthermore, he warned that if humanity fails to achieve stability, we might face a similar fate. Once again, his ideas were dismissed and he was labeled as a madman. 19 years after Nana Shimura's death. A scientist named Kaseki was newly recruited by Kaide Igaraki to aid All for One in expanding and creating resources necessary to defeat All Might and take over Japan. Kaide Igaraki's concept was to develop a human weapon. He experimented with various approaches, such as attempting to control a brain-dead person, but his research was never successful. He then enlisted Kaseki, who was a close friend of Kaide Igaraki, to assist him in mathematical solutions and to explore alternative means of serving All for One. Kaseki, whose ideology somewhat resembled that of Staines, believed that heroes were motivated solely by fame and money. He argued that humanity's greed had evolved into gluttony and held the view that desire is noble. He believed that all human achievement stemmed from the desire to create. Kaseki, an extraordinary scientist, harbored a desire to uncover events from 3,700 years ago. He disagreed with Kaide Igaraki's desire to erase ancient history, which he perceived as solely driven by All for One's desires. When Kaide Igaraki noticed Kaseki's financial struggles, he offered him a position. He revealed details about All for One and One for All. Kaseki, aware that refusal could lead to being hunted and killed, recognized the importance of pursuing his dreams. He understood that humanity's progress would stagnate if it abandoned history. He needed resources, so he agreed under the circumstances that he is allowed to pursue his dream. All for One agreed since for hundreds of years, no archaeological evidence has been found. Kaseki possessed a quirk called Read, enabling him to read any language and read multiple books, determining their time period to the present time, and also capable of writing in any language. This quirk labeled him as the most important man for history. But one day, humanity made a remarkable discovery. A blue-shaped box inscribed with ancient text. Scientists worldwide turned to Dr. Kaseki for translation. Numerous similar boxes were found globally, leading to various conclusions drawn from the inscriptions. Among Kaseki's theories, he encountered the same ancient text, this time engraved in gold. He speculated that it might have originated from the sky due to archaeological evidence suggesting that gold submerged in the ocean would dissolve due to the aquarija carried by extinct sea beasts. Even with his quirk, science refuted every possibility that gold could ever originate from the sky. This gave the man a new title. The Madman. The gold piece contained two inscriptions. One signed by a man named Gold D. Roger and the other written by individuals from an island called Skypia, around the same time as the world's submersion into the ocean. Kaseki puzzled over the significant time gap between the inscriptions 900 years apart, then 40 years apart, unable to discern its significance. While contemplating this mystery, All for One urged Kaseki to refrain from pursuing his desires, he deemed it meaningless information. Aware that All for One would likely monitor him regardless of what he answers, Kaseki agreed temporarily and refrained from doing any research. All for One needed Kaseki. So he kept him alive. All for One, determined to prevent Kaseki from continuing his research, prisoned him to Kaide Igaraki's science lab. The world assumed that the world's most important man committed suicide. The world believed that the most influential man had taken his own life. In truth, Kaseki was imprisoned nearly all hours of the day. Only on Friday nights was he granted a brief reprieve, left alone for a couple of hours to pursue his desires. All for One ensured Kaseki's obedience by attaching a ticking bomb that would explode if he went against orders given. Although that, All for One offered Kaseki the promise of freedom if he completed his duty. Now I can stop explaining and finally get into the story. And perspective, I guess. The perspective of Kaseki. Kaseki decided, on the little amount of freedom he had, to take a walk to cool his head off. This is terrible, absolutely terrible, Kaseki thought, feeling trapped in his dire situation. There's no escape from this. If I complete the duty, I'll surely be killed. And if I flee, I'll be hunted down and killed, he thought, sighing heavily as years passed in his confinement within the lab. I'm starting to develop PTSD. I doubt I'll ever be able to set foot in a lab again, he sarcastically, though the statement wasn't that far from reality. Kicking at rocks with a heavy heart, he wandered along a trail in the Mutafusu forest. The moon looks exceptionally beautiful tonight, he remarked to himself before a sudden realization struck him. Wait, am I turning into an old man now? He thought, reflecting on the passage of time. Was it 6 years? Or perhaps 5? Despite having a solution to Kaide Igaraki, his desire to survive outweighed his knowledge. So, he decided to play ignorant. Walking alone for a few minutes, he spotted a glowing object in the distance. What's that? He wondered, approaching cautiously. As he drew nearer, he knelt down to examine a triangular piece sticking out from the ground. What on earth? This doesn't resemble any substance, and it looks oddly like a corner of a book, he thought, examining the mysterious glowing object. He began feeling exited as he knelt down and began to tug at the glowing object. Being locked up for so long has weakened me, he acknowledged, though in truth, he was frail to begin with. Nonetheless, he managed to extract it, confirming his suspicion it was indeed a book. Lineage Factor. He read aloud, puzzled by the title written in an ancient language similar to the one he had discovered carved in gold. The text dated back 3,700 years, and he couldn't believe his eyes. "Am I finally becoming mad?" he exclaimed excitedly as he opened the book. He sat there for about 10 minutes, reading it cover to cover. With the aid of his quirk, he read 10 times faster than an average person. As he finished the book, he was utterly dumbfounded. 3,700 years ago, humanity possessed the blueprints of life itself, he muttered, bewildered by the revelation. The book provided instructions for creating a specific human, yet it offered no explanation of how to create blueprints itself. The Earth sinking into the ocean 3,700 years ago, and this book predating the one carved in gold. Could the individual's claim of being all alone actually meant that they were the last surviving humans? He speculated, pondering the connection between a single man's lineage factor and ancient history. If the Earth did indeed sink, and this book was written prior to the gold inscription, then perhaps the individual's claims of being all alone actually meant that they were the last remnants of humanity, he continued, contemplating the significance of the lineage factor and its implications. He reread the text, absorbing every detail. Desires are noble, he said to himself, proud of the statement he created. Perhaps devil fruits and quirks are related manifestations of human desires. And just like devil fruits, quirks come with a cost, he reasoned, recalling the correlation between desires and justice. Humanity has forgotten the true essence of desire, mistaking it for gluttony, he concluded, piecing together the events of 3,700 years ago. Yet, he remained clueless about the identity and desires of those involved. I wish I could have lived in that era, he sighed, gazing up at the moon in contemplation. Suddenly, an idea struck him, convincing All for One to allow him to create that man. It was risky, but science was all about taking risks. He knew he would be caught if he directly told his idea to All for One. So he decided to do something else. Returning to the lab, he slept as usual, but the next morning was different. He used the provided phone to call Garaki. I have a solution. We can artificially create a human, he announced over the phone, leaving Garaki dumbfounded. Are you out of your mind? We can't artificially create a human, it's not like we have the technology to create cells and DNA, Garaki retorted incredulously. Actually, I've found a way, and I've already created the DNA blueprints. Come to the lab as soon as possible, Kaseki replied confidently. When Garaki finally arrived at the lab, Kaseki promptly shared his discoveries without delay. He elaborated on how the artificial human will be created. Given our current limitations in resources and technology, we need to allow the weapon to develop naturally from a fetus, just like any other human. So we need to create a sperm cell, he explained, utilizing the whiteboard to visually aid his explanation. Kaseki subtly tweaked certain aspects of the blueprint, such as altering the description of the man's toe joints, to avoid raising suspicions. Garaki deliberated extensively before proposing a solution. This could pose an issue if we have to wait, he pondered before a sudden realization dawned on him. Actually, we don't necessarily require the actual weapon. Master could simply take his quirk, Garaki suggested, sporting a smile as he observed Kaseki, whose expression turned slightly pale. Kaseki hesitated. No, but then he was struck by a sudden realization he could use this to his advantage by lying. Why not? Garaki inquired, appearing puzzled by Kaseki's response. Kaseki attempted to backtrack, fabricating an explanation. It's just that All for One would need rigorous training to fully grasp the power of this artificial quirk. It exerts 10 times the pressure of One for All, he fabricated, striving to devise a solution. Garaki dismissed Kaseki's concerns, expressing confidence in All for One's abilities. Perhaps not yet. All for One would require a quirker-intensive training to harness the potential of this artificial quirk. I believe it surpasses the strength of One for All, Kaseki speculated. Before Garaki could delve further, a phone call interrupted them. It was All for One, unexpectedly agreeing not to acquire the new quirk himself. But master, this quirk would significantly enhance your strength, Garaki remarked as All for One responded. Ah, Garaki, always thinking ahead. While the allure of increased strength is tempting, we must be mindful of the risks involved. Acquiring this quirk may indeed enhance my abilities, but we must consider the potential consequences. Our power lies not just in raw strength, but in our ability to manipulate and control. We must ensure that any new quirk aligns with our long-term goals and strategies. If the weapon can be controlled, there's no need for me to take it. Master, your foresight is unparalleled. I trust in your judgment completely. After a quick back and forth, All for One hangs up as Kaseki does a little fist bump. Garaki notices this, but then lets it slide for some reason. Once the call was over, Kaseki explained his plan to Garaki. They talked about how they would make life artificially and what they needed to do. Despite the risks, they were determined to make it happen. For Kaseki, it was a chance to chase his dreams, and for Garaki, it was a way to help All for One's plans. With their plans set, Kaseki and Garaki got to work. Creating the artificial sperm cell. It took days to complete as they were awake all day all night. Kaseki explained that after the baby had been born, it was crucial for him to stay, for some reason. As All for One and Garaki delved deeper into their plan, they realized they needed a suitable vessel to carry the child. Garaki couldn't risk using someone who might have their own agenda or be too powerful to control. All for One needed someone loyal, someone they could manipulate without question. After careful consideration, they found the perfect candidate, a newly recruited woman who was quirkless. She was eager to prove herself and was grateful for the opportunity to work alongside All for One. Little did she know, she was about to become a pawn in their grand scheme. All for One approached her with an offer she couldn't refuse, appealing to her desire for purpose and belonging. He painted a picture of glory and importance, promising her a pivotal role in shaping the future. Blinded by ambition and unaware of the true nature of their intentions, she eagerly accepted. Under the guise of scientific research, they began the process of artificially creating life, using the woman as the vessel for their experiment. She was kept in the dark about the true nature of their project, believing she was contributing to a noble cause. Despite the ethical implications and the potential consequences of their actions, All for One was unwavering in his pursuit of power and control. Were willing to do whatever it took to achieve their goals, even if it meant sacrificing the innocence of an unsuspecting woman. The day of the artificial insemination. As the appointed day for the artificial insemination approached, tension mounted in the laboratory. All for One and Garaki orchestrated every detail, leaving nothing to chance. The newly recruited woman, oblivious to the true intentions behind the procedure, awaited it with a mixture of anticipation and anxiety, her heart pounding with uncertainty about the future that awaited her. In the lab, the procedure began under the watchful eyes of All for One and Garaki. The woman laid on the operating table, her hands clenched tightly as she braced herself for what was to come. The scientists worked with precision and efficiency, their movements purposeful as they carried out the delicate task. As the artificial insemination progressed, the woman's mind raced with thoughts. Would this procedure bring about the salvation she so desperately sought, or would it plunge her deeper into the web of manipulation spun by All for One and Garaki? Despite her fears, a glimmer of hope flickered within her, fueled by the belief that perhaps, just perhaps, this child would be her redemption. In the months that followed, the lab buzzed with activity as scientists and researchers monitored the development of the fetus with meticulous attention to detail. Every aspect of the child's growth was scrutinized, analyzed, and recorded, as if it were the key to unlocking the secrets of the universe itself. Amidst the flurry of scientific activity, Kaseki watched silently from the sidelines, his mind consumed by conflicting emotions. On one hand, he was awed by the sheer brilliance of the research being conducted before him. On the other hand, he couldn't shake the nagging feeling of unease that gnawed at his conscience, a voice whispering in the depths of his mind that something was terribly wrong. He thought he always was heartless to other people's lives. But knowing that the woman would most likely die after childbirth, he couldn't stand being silent. As the day of the childbirth drew near, Kaseki found himself alone with a woman. Kaseki explained everything, the baby, All for One and what was awaiting her. But he couldn't force himself to tell her she might die. She confided in him her fears and anxieties, her voice trembling with emotion as she spoke of her hopes and dreams for the child growing within her. "I'm scared," she admitted, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I'm scared of what they'll do to my baby." Kaseki listened in silence, his heart heavy with sympathy for the woman before him. He knew the consequences, but he had never imagined the extent of the suffering it would inflict upon the woman. "I don't want my child to be a pawn in their game," the woman continued, her voice choked with emotion. "I want him to be free, to live a life of his own choosing." Kaseki nodded, his mind racing as he weighed the implications of her words. The answer came to him in a flash of clarity, a resolve stealing within him as he met the woman's tearful gaze. "I won't let them hurt you or your baby. Your baby will be the freest man. I will make sure of it," he vowed, his voice firm with determination. "I'll do whatever it takes to keep you both safe, even if it means defying All for One himself," he said as he always prioritized thinking logically. He knew there would be a great risk if he defied him. He knew he would most likely get killed. Tears welled in the woman's eyes as she reached out and clasped Kaseki's hand in gratitude, a silent understanding passing between them. As the moment of childbirth arrived, tension thickened in the air, palpable even amidst the sterile clinical atmosphere of the laboratory. The woman, her face contorted in pain, pushed with all her might, her cries echoing off the cold, unforgiving walls. Beside her, Kaseki stood, his heart heavy with apprehension as he watched the scene unfold before him. Then, in a flurry of motion and sound, the child was born. The room fell silent as the infant let out its first cry, its tiny body slick with amniotic fluid, its lungs filling with the sweet air of life. Kaseki's heart skipped a beat as he caught sight of the child's face, his breath catching in his throat at the sight of the black-haired baby cradled in his arms. "It's supposed to have white hair," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the hum of the machinery surrounding them. What went wrong? But there was no time for answers, no time to dwell on the apparent failure of their experiment. As Kaseki looked down at the woman lying motionless on the table, a wave of grief washed over him, threatening to engulf him in its depths. She had given her life for this child, sacrificed everything in the name of science and progress, only to be met with disappointment and despair. With trembling hands, Kaseki gently laid the baby down on the table, his vision blurred with tears as he reached out to close the woman's eyes one final time. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. "I'm so sorry." But there was no time for mourning, no time to dwell on the past. As Kaseki turned to leave, a sense of crisis seized him, driving him forward with a newfound determination. He scooped up the child in his arms, holding it close to his chest as he ran, his footsteps echoing through the empty corridors of the lab. Outside, the night air was cool against his skin as he emerged into the darkness, the moon casting an ethereal glow upon the world below. With each step he took, the weight of his burden grew heavier, the enormity of his task weighing upon him like a stone around his neck. But Kaseki did not falter. He ran, his heart pounding in his chest, his breath coming in ragged gasps as he fled into the woods, the child's cries mingling with his own as they disappeared into the night. All for One may have been watching, Garaki may have had duties to fulfill, but in that moment, none of it mattered. All that mattered was the child in his arms and the promise he had made to keep it safe, no matter the cost. As Kaseki fled with the baby in his arms, the urgency of their situation was palpable. He knew that All for One wouldn't let them escape so easily. With tears streaming down his face, Kaseki dashed through the dense foliage of the forest, his heart pounding with fear and determination. Meanwhile, All for One wasted no time in dispatching his minions to hunt down Kaseki and the child. He couldn't afford to let them escape and potentially reveal his plans to the world. The hired killers tracked Kaseki's movements, confident in their ability to carry out their master's orders. They closed in on his location, ready to eliminate any obstacles in their path. However, fate had other plans. As the assassins reached the spot where they believed Kaseki and the baby were hiding, they found no trace of them. The area was eerily quiet, with no sign of life in sight. Confused but not deterred, the killers reported back to All for One, claiming that they had carried out their mission successfully. Little did they know that Kaseki and the baby had managed to evade them, finding refuge in an abandoned cabin close by. Despite the danger that still lurked around them, Kaseki breathed a sigh of relief, knowing that they had narrowly escaped death. But their journey was far from over, and they would need to remain vigilant to stay one step ahead of All for One's relentless pursuit. "I'll never think logically again," he sighed, gazing at the baby. Despite the chaos, the infant slept soundly, much to his surprise. "Now, what shall I name you?" he pondered, racking his brain for ideas. Suddenly, the name of a certain individual from the blueprints came to mind. Monkey D. Luffy, wasn't it? "Well, I suppose that's your name, little guy," he murmured, gently stroking the baby's cheek. Unexpectedly, the baby bit his finger, even in slumber. "Ow. How can you bite so hard without any teeth?" he exclaimed, withdrawing his hand from the baby's mouth. "I suppose you're hungry. I'll find food for you tomorrow," he decided, settling down to sleep with the baby beside him in the cabin's bed. The story is very interesting to read completely. But one question I have is, where did Kaseki get Luffy's DNA? Surely they wanted to revive Nika because of the white hair, but it will only work if he wakes up from his fruit. Thank you so much for the question and the compliment. I was kinda hinting at how. But I get that some may not understand what I meant. I suck at explaining, so I'll explain a little better. So we didn't really talk about the perspective of people in the time of One Piece, so I'll explain here. So basically, as Vegapunk before the whole incident studied the material used to create the poneglyphs. This led him to creating an artificial duplicate in order to understand the power source from 900 years ago. As we know, the poneglyphs are incapable of being destroyed. This led to Vegapunk or the satellites, probably one or two of them, creating the lineage factor of Luffy. This next part is a thing I made up. So basically, if a devil fruit is to fall into the ocean it gets destroyed. So because of this, Vegapunk knew that the world would most likely turn into chaos in the future if there wasn't a warrior of liberation. Since he kinda believes that desires are equal to justice. As in he believes if one desires something, that will be what will determine what's right and what's wrong. So, with that ideology, the world would be in chaos if there weren't someone who solely existed from desires. That's why I think Vegapunk would create this lineage factor of Luffy, who is basically Nika. Because Nika Luffy's ideology is freedom. He probably got the sample of Luffy's DNA from his hair, now I'm supposing it's probably when Luffy is in Gear 5. With that, the blueprints itself was just white hair and only explained the nature of Nika. So that's why Kaseki is thinking, is this a failed experiment? Conclusion. Vegapunk created the blueprints of Luffy with a duplicate material of poneglyphs. Which is why Kaseki says this doesn't look like any material I've ever seen, indicating that the material the book is made of is something new. The blueprints were made through the sample of Luffy's Gear 5 hair, making it the closest sample of Nika. Which made Kaseki doubt why the baby has black hair instead, because it's actually Luffy's DNA still, but just in the form of Gear 5. Since Zone has a will of their own, they might also have a DNA of their own. Which then, thousands of years later, he found that exact book in a random forest. As Vegapunk said, if someone desires him, he will never disappear. As the sun reached noon, Kaseki was abruptly awakened by the piercing cries and vigorous kicks of the baby. Startled, he jolted upright, scanning his surroundings with confusion. Where am I? He muttered, his memory gradually returning as he rubbed his temples. His gaze shifted downward, meeting the tearful eyes of the infant, its tiny feet thrashing in distress. Ah. You must be hungry, he exclaimed, feeling a pang of panic at the unfamiliarity of caring for a baby. Okay, let's keep calm. I remembered to bring my phone, he reassured himself, retrieving the device and noting its remaining 30% battery life. Engaging in a quick brainstorming session, he suddenly recalled a particular individual. He hesitated, doubting the likelihood of their assistance, but as he glanced back at the baby, he let out a resigned sigh and dialed the number. Despite the poor signal, he persisted until the call finally connected. Kaseki? I thought you were dead, the person screams as you can hear grunts of pain in the background. The voice belonged to a woman. Yay, I thought I would be too, but I'm alive and well. But I need your help, he said as the baby began trying to eat his finger. Kaseki then explained the full situation, still under the radar of All for One and also the baby. The woman seemed baffled by this. How can you create? She began, but it sounded like she stepped out of a room. Never mind the details now. I need you to send me the coordinates to you know where. I'll send you mine right now, he said as he sent her his location. Never mind that the baby needs food first, she sighed. Here, come to this location, she said. The location wasn't far from him. The baby was still hanging onto Kaseki's finger. Kaseki's finger was in a little pain, but he couldn't manage to take his finger out of the baby's mouth. So, he picked up the baby and began to walk in the forest. I have to be careful. But luckily, I'm soon in a private area. All for One wouldn't chase me in here, right? He thought as he approached the destination. It was a parking lot. No one was there yet, but it didn't take long for a car to pull up. Thanks, my dear, she says as the man in the car suddenly left. Kaseki slowly approached her, he had a few injuries. Oh boy, you must have had a troublesome night. Let me heal you, she said as she kissed his cheek. Suddenly, all the injuries began to heal, but all the energy in him began to drain, and he accidentally dropped the baby in his arms. All of the color in their faces began to drain. He dropped the baby, the woman thought as the baby fell to the ground, it bounced a little as well. She quickly went down to kiss the baby, but before that she saw the baby laughing and not injured. They both just stood there silent for a while. Kaseki had so many thoughts in his head, but he quickly remembered one thing. Imagination turning into mass. He then knelt down and pulled the baby's cheek, surprisingly, the baby's cheek began to expand. Is it a quirk? Did you create a human with an already existing quirk? The woman asked, astonished by the whole thing. The baby, Kaseki, and everything. Kaseki, who didn't really explain everything on how he created the baby or why, stood up and began thinking, brainstorming again. I'm not sure if it's a failed experiment or not. But if he can make his imagination into mass, does that mean others' imagination also affects this power? The weird thing is, the book had double the amount of chromosomes. If a normal person were to have that amount, they wouldn't even be alive. Which would mean that there are two different DNAs in him. The book described the man Menki D. Luffy as a human. Would this mean another form of DNA from some other entity was mixed into his own? In the meantime, Kaseki was thinking this, the woman picked up the baby and took out a bottle of milk and began to feed it. You're going to scare the poor baby, be more careful, the woman says as whenever Kaseki brainstorms something he always has this weird evil look on his face. Huh? What did you say? He said as he snapped back into reality. The baby finished the bottle of milk in seconds and it looked like the baby was even hungrier. I don't think you can take care of the baby. Give him to me. Sorry, old lady. If All for One finds the baby, he won't hold back on it. Well, I may not be as spry as I used to be, but he will be safe with me. No can do. I still need him for some answers. Recovery girl sighed again as she just gave up on convincing him. Anyways, can you give me the coordinates to my private lab? Oh, of course, but I still don't quite understand why you built a lab in the middle of nowhere. For occasions like this, and I'm also tired of people coming into my actual lab and disturbing my research. He's referring to the many people criticizing him and calling him a madman, and also because a lot of his experiments are quite dangerous. He hasn't told anyone the location of his secret lab besides 2 people. The woman let this slide. Alright, I'll call a taxi. No, we can't let anyone know where it is, he said as he looked around and saw a car. He suddenly had an evil grin on his face as he lurked towards the car and somehow managed to open it. Are you insane? You can't be stealing a car, the old lady said as she approached Kaseki and started scolding him. It takes a man to be a man. Do what you gotta do to survive, he said as he entered the car and began to regulate some of the wires, and suddenly the car turned on. You're unbelievable. This is why people call you mad. Just give me the baby, old lady, he said as he put the baby beside him. He drove slowly to not make the baby flip forward and also to not wake the baby up. Oh yeah, bring me some resources and baby stuff. Oh, and clothes and lots of money as well. The old lady sighed again. Keep the baby safe. The journey to the lab felt lengthy, with cars honking at them impatiently as they drove slowly. Surprisingly, the baby managed to sleep through it all. After about an hour, they arrived at the lab located in the heart of a dense forest. The area had been abandoned for years due to rumors of haunting and dangerous experiments gone wrong, leading to fears of radioactivity. However, these rumors were all made up by Kaseki to deter people from visiting. He even erected warning signs to keep trespassers away. Perspective of a random dude. No way. This is the 3rd car this year. Why do people keep stealing my cars? The man exclaimed, his voice tinged with frustration and despair. He fell to his knees, tears welling in his eyes, as he surveyed the empty space where his car should have been parked. Back to the main story. As Kaseki approached the entrance to his hidden laboratory, a mix of nostalgia and anticipation flooded his mind. He reached out to touch the walls, feeling the familiar texture beneath his fingertips. I've missed you so much, he murmured softly, a hint of sentimentality in his voice, as he began kissing and hugging the walls of the lab. With a gentle push, he swung the door open, eager to reunite with his sanctuary. However, what greeted him inside was not the orderly workspace he remembered, but a scene of chaos and disarray. His eyes widened in shock, and a horrified expression crossed his face. What the hell happened in here, he exclaimed, his voice echoing through the empty room. The lab was in shambles, with equipment strewn about haphazardly and papers scattered across the floor like confetti. Kaseki's attention was drawn to 2 figures seated at a nearby table, seemingly unfazed by the commotion. They were munching on bowls of ramen with a casual air, completely oblivious to his presence. What is that old geezer doing here? Hey, this is our home. One of the kids piped up, pointing in Kaseki's direction. His face flushed with anger at the audacity of the remark. Wait, isn't that the famous scientist who won the Hero Prize and died not so long ago? The other kid said, momentarily stopping to cast a curious glance at Kaseki. The Hero Prize is basically the same as a Nobel Prize. But was founded by a hero. In a fit of frustration, Kaseki set the baby down, his grip tightening with tension as he walked towards the intruders. Get out of my lab, you stupid brats. He screamed, his voice laced with fury as he attempted to grab them by the neck. But the kids remained stubborn, refusing to budge from their seats. They exchanged defiant glances, their resolve unyielding in the face of Kaseki's rage, but they were dragged out by him. The kids, still stubborn, decided to sit in front of the lab. Hours passed, with the standoff showing no signs of resolution. As the sun began to set, a woman approached the lab, bearing the resources Kaseki had requested. Upon seeing the children, she couldn't help but feel a pang of sympathy as the kids were freezing. You poor kids, you must be cold. Come inside with me, she offered, extending a welcoming hand. Inside, Kaseki's anger flared at the sight of the unexpected guests. Why are those 2 brats with you? He demanded, his frustration palpable as he struggled to comprehend the situation. The woman, however, saw things differently. You are so evil. They were sitting outside in the cold and you didn't invite them in, she scolded, her reproach tinged with disapproval. As the kids hid behind her, making an evil grin at him. Despite Kaseki's protests, the woman insisted on taking care of the children, emphasizing the importance of compassion and empathy. I'm already taking care of 1 kid. I can't take care of more. I don't care if you are already caring for 1 kid. If you don't take care of these 2 lovely children, I will not give you any resources you need. But reluctantly, Kaseki relented, begrudgingly accepting the responsibility thrust upon him. Fine, only if they clean up this mess, he conceded, his voice tinged with resignation as he eyed the kids with a stern gaze. As they exchanged uneasy glances. The man worded with his mouth, I will make you work your asses off. After the woman left. Kaseki ordered the kids to clean up the mess they made. Despite their reluctance, the kids begrudgingly started to tidy up, but their insults persisted like a buzzing fly in Kaseki's ear. "This is stupid," one muttered, tossing a pile of papers haphazardly into a drawer. Kaseki's patience wore thin, his face contorting into a scowl as he stormed over. "What did you just do?" he barked, his voice like thunder echoing in the small lab. The kid shrugged defiantly. "What's it look like, old man?" "I'm cleaning up your mess," he sneered. Without hesitation, Kaseki's hand snapped out, swatting the back of the kid's head with a resounding crack. "Watch your mouth, brat," he growled, his eyes flashing with anger. The other kid snickered, emboldened by his companion's defiance. "Yeah, listen to the old man. He's probably got a screw loose," he taunted, earning himself a similar reprimand. But despite their insolence, the kids continued to work, their grumbles and insults intermingling with the clatter of cleaning supplies. Kaseki watched them like a hawk, his lips pressed into a thin line of disapproval. He wanted everything perfect. As the lab gradually returned to order, the insults dwindled, replaced by weary resignation. The kids exchanged glances, their defiance tempered by the realization that they were fighting a losing battle against Kaseki's stubbornness. At last, the task was complete and Kaseki surveyed the lab with a critical eye. Finally he grumbled, though there was a begrudging note of approval in his voice. The kids grunted at his tone but said nothing, knowing that further provocation would only earn them another round of scolding and a hit in the head. With a dismissive wave of his hand, Kaseki turned away towards the baby. The baby was wide awake, his hungry cries echoing in the small lab. Kaseki, recognizing the signs of hunger, swiftly retrieved a bottle of milk and began feeding him. The kids, their curiosity piqued by the commotion, edged closer to get a better look. "So, old man, what's his name?" one of the kids inquired, eyeing the baby as he guzzled down the milk. Kaseki, a twinge of annoyance flickering across his face at the disrespectful address, retorted, "I'm not an old man. I'm 47. "Whatever, old man. What is the baby's name?" Kaseki, resigned to their lack of manners, replied, "His name is Luffy." "Luffy? That's such a dumb name," the kids scoffed, their laughter filling the room. Kaseki paid them no mind, after all, why should he be offended by it? "So, old man, are you really a madman?" That question was the final straw for Kaseki. With a curt command, he ordered the kids to scram and head to bed. "But I'm hungry." "Yeah, me too." "Then go find food, you brats." "But we don't know how to cook and you threw away all the ramen we had." Sighing, Kaseki realized he was also famished. He hadn't eaten since yesterday, his stomach now growling in protest. "Fine, feed the baby. I'll make something for you to eat," he relented, heading to his modest kitchen. "I didn't know crazy people could cook," one of the kids remarked, trailing after Kaseki. "Cooking is another form of science. I am a scientist, after all," Kaseki explained as he busied himself preparing a meal. After a while, the food was ready and the baby had drifted off to sleep, his tiny hand bit one of the kid's fingers. "How can he bite so hard without any teeth?" One of the kids marveled as suddenly they heard the laughter of Kaseki as he recalled his own encounter with a baby's strong bite. "Eat up, kids," Kaseki encouraged, joining them at the table. To their surprise, the food wasn't half bad. "Hey, old man, you may be crazy, but this is delicious," one of the kids admitted, earning a smirk from Kaseki as they all dug into the meal. As they were peacefully eating the meal, a question popped up in the head of Kaseki. "About earlier, what did you guys mean when you said you had nowhere to go?" Kaseki asked, savoring the food he had prepared. Their expressions shifted, a tinge of sadness coloring their faces. "Well, people don't really care about quirkless people. So when we were 4, both of our parents sent us up for adoption. Everybody treated us like we were just destined to be failures. So, around half a year ago, we left towards the hunting area. Then we found this place and it looked like nobody had been there for a long time, so we just decided to call it our home." "Yeah, I mean, just because we're quirkless doesn't mean we can't beat up guys. I'm going to become the best hero there is without a quirk," one of the kids chimed in defiantly. Feeling a twinge of sympathy, Kaseki remained quiet. "Don't tell me you are like those guys. Do you also think we can't be useful?" "No, as a matter of fact, humanity before quirks made thousands of things we still use today. In fact, after quirks were discovered, humanity almost stopped creating and discovering things. I honestly don't get why people hate quirkless people so much, as if their forefathers weren't quirkless themselves," he said calmly between bites of food. The kids, hearing this, began to smile, unused to hearing such praise. "You both want to become heroes and prove society wrong. Be my guest. I'll be your personal trainer," Kaseki offered, remembering that he would also have to train the baby. There was no reason not to let the other kids train too. "Really? Old man, you may be crazy, but you're good crazy," the kids said simultaneously, prompting Kaseki to snap at them. "I'm not crazy." Clean up the dishes and go to bed before I change my mind, he barked, watching as the kids hurriedly cleared the table and took the baby carriage to their room. Hey, that's my room, he thought to himself, but he decided to let it slide, opting to sleep on the couch instead. After a couple of years. After 3 years a lot has changed. The two kids were a part of some experiments Kaseki made, and they were 9 years old now, and the baby began to learn how to walk and talk and even draw. His powers were made fun of with the kids, and he would usually cry whenever they made fun of him. Rubber powers. That's so lame, but beside that the kid never gave up and continued to smile and laugh. Meanwhile, Kaseki delved into various experiments, studying the ancient past and more about Luffy's powers. He concluded a lot of things. But some things were still a mystery, like why and how QUIRK suddenly started existing. One of Kaseki's projects involved the creation of combat robots. These robots were designed to simulate real-world combat scenarios, providing the children with a platform to develop their skills and tactics. Kaseki spared no effort in crafting these robots. Recovery Girl had visited 10 times a week when he first created those monstrosities. Luffy, with his newfound ability to walk when he was 1 year old, stumbled around the cabin with unbridled energy, his laughter filling the air as he chased after the two children. They, in turn, giggled and ran circles around him, their bond evident in every joyful interaction. In one corner of the lab, where makeshift obstacles had been set up for Luffy's mini-training sessions. With Kaseki's guidance, the toddler began his training, taking hesitant steps and throwing playful punches at soft children, made fun of his rubber powers sometimes, but still cheered him on, their encouragement spurring him to push his limits and reach for the stars. Meanwhile, the two children engaged in their own form of training. Though they lacked quirks, their determination and resilience were unmatched, driving them to excel in every challenge they faced. One day 2 years later. The soft glow of the morning sun seeped through the cracks in the cabin's wooden walls, casting a warm and inviting light across the room. Kaseki, seated at the worn wooden table, furrowed his brow in concentration, a slight frown marring his features as he struggled to recall the names of the two children. I forgot, but what are your names?" he asked, absent-mindedly rubbing his temple as he searched his memory. To his surprise, the children responded with a candid honesty that caught him off guard. "We don't have any names. The names our parents gave us are dead to us, and we couldn't decide what our names should be," they explained, their voices tinged with a hint of sadness. Luffy, with his usual smile, said, "How about Ace and Sabo?" "Ace and Sabo?" the children echoed, exchanging curious glances before a spark of excitement lit up their eyes. "I'll be Ace," they both exclaimed simultaneously, their voices blending in a chorus of excitement. But as quickly as their agreement came, a disagreement followed. "No, I'll be Ace. You can be Sabo," one argued, their competitive spirits rising to the surface. The other kid, who's not one to back down from a challenge, countered, "No way, Sabo sounds too much like Soba. I'll be Ace." The debate raged on as Luffy was laughing the whole time. One of the kids proposed a solution, a game of rock paper scissors to settle the matter once and for all. "Ah, man, that's not fair," one of them grumbled, their protest falling on deaf ears. "Life isn't fair. From now on, my name is Ace," the victor declared triumphantly, a smug grin playing on their lips as the other kid reluctantly conceded defeat. "Fine, I'll be Sabo," his pouty expression quickly melting into a grin of their own. "What are you kids doing? Get back to training or you'll help me in my next experiment." As soon as the kids heard the word experiment, they ran as fast as they could. After another 3 years of daily training, the children had made many new discoveries. One stormy day, Kaseki attempted to generate a powerful magnet using electricity. However, Luffy, known for his impulsive nature, grabbed a piece of iron and was struck by lightning. "Luffy!" Kaseki and the two other kids screamed, fearing the worst. To their surprise, Luffy waved back at them, seemingly unharmed. At that moment, Kaseki realized there was much he still didn't understand about Luffy's abilities. He made a note in his notebook that electricity couldn't pass through objects created by imagination. To simplify things for the kids, he decided to tell them that Luffy had a rubber quirk. Perhaps when they grew older, Kaseki would explain the true extent of Luffy's powers to them. However, he remained uncertain, especially regarding the mysterious white hair mentioned in the blueprints and Luffy's ability to influence others when his current powers seemed to only be influenced by others, not vice versa. The three kids, Ace, Luffy, and Sabo, were engrossed in their daily training routine, the crisp morning air filling their lungs as they pushed themselves to their limits. Despite their age difference, Ace and Sabo being 12 years old and Luffy merely 6, they trained together tirelessly, each driven by their own ambitions. Ace and Sabo, being older and more experienced, often teased Luffy affectionately about his quirk, the unique abilities bestowed upon him by the mysterious power of rubber. Despite Luffy's determination, he struggled to fully harness his powers, often leading to playful scuffles where he inevitably found himself on the losing end. During a break in their training, the trio sat down to enjoy a meal together, with Luffy eagerly devouring his favorite dish, a hearty plate of meat. Between mouthfuls, Sabo couldn't help but question Luffy's frequent mentions of a mysterious figure named Sanji. "Luffy, why do you always mention weird names like Sanji?" Sabo inquired, a bemused expression on his face as he glanced at Ace for confirmation. "I dunno," Luffy replied casually, his cheeks bulging with food. His response drew a chuckle from Ace, who playfully swiped a piece of meat from Luffy's plate. "I knew you were a bit of an idiot, but this is a whole new level," Ace teased, grinning mischievously as Luffy pouted in mock indignation. As the day progressed and the sun began its descent, the trio found themselves sprawled out on the grass, gazing up at the twinkling stars above. Luffy, feeling the weariness of the day creeping over him, soon drifted off to sleep, his steady breaths punctuating the quiet night air. It was in this tranquil moment, with the sky painted in hues of purple and gold, that Sabo and Ace began to share their dreams and aspirations. Their voices, soft and filled with determination, carried through the stillness of the night as they spoke of their desire to become heroes, individuals capable of making a difference in the world. "Luffy, Ace," Sabo whispered, breaking the silence that enveloped them like a comforting blanket. "What do you dream of becoming?" Ace's eyes sparkled with unwavering resolve as he revealed his aspiration to become a hero, someone who could protect the innocent and stand against injustice. "I want to be a hero," Sabo chimed in, his voice tinged with passion. "But not just any hero. I want to be a craftsman, a creator of wonders who leaves behind a legacy of beauty and innovation." The last line he quoted from a comic book he and Ace read. Luffy getting hit in the head, he slowly wakes up as they question him about his dream, a sleepy grin spreading across his face as he listened to their dreams in exchange. "Alright then. I'll be the king of heroes." His statement was met with laughter from his friends. As Ace and Sabo exchanged amused glances, they couldn't help it. "You too, Luffy? You want to be a hero?" they asked, their curiosity piqued by his unexpected declaration. Luffy shook his head, his expression thoughtful. "Nah, I don't want to be a hero. I want to live more freely than that." Though his friends didn't fully grasp the depth of his words, they respected his individuality and shrugged off his unconventional response. Sabo, ever the optimist, offered words of encouragement. "How are you going to be the king of heroes and not be a hero?" Ace said, raising his eyebrows. "I don't know if you're going to be the king of heroes or whatever that means," Sabo chuckled, a fond smile playing on his lips, "but I know you'll make it big someday." As Ace, Sabo, and Luffy shared stories and dreams beneath the twinkling stars. Sabo, his eyes shining with determination, turned to his companions with a wide grin. "You know, guys," he began, his voice filled with excitement, "we're more than just friends. We're like brothers, aren't we?" Ace nodded in agreement, a soft smile playing on his lips. "Yeah, we are," he affirmed, casting a fond glance at Luffy, who sat beside him, wide-eyed and eager. Luffy, ever the carefree soul, grinned widely. "Yeah, brothers," he echoed, his voice filled with warmth. And in that moment, as the weight of their newfound bond settled upon them, Luffy's eyelids grew heavy, and before he knew it, he had drifted off to sleep, his rhythmic breathing the only sound in the quiet night. Sabo and Ace exchanged bemused glances, their amusement quickly turning to mild irritation. "Luffy, seriously?" Ace muttered, shaking his head in exasperation. Sabo's lips twitched with annoyance as he nudged Luffy gently. "Hey, wake up," he urged, his tone tinged with frustration. "We're having a moment here." But Luffy remained blissfully unaware, his dreams carrying him to a world of adventure and excitement. With a resigned sigh, Ace and Sabo exchanged a knowing look, their irritation melting away in the face of their friend's undeniable innocence. "Well," Ace said with a wry smile, "I guess we'll have to continue this conversation in the morning." Sabo nodded in agreement, his annoyance dissipating as he settled back against the soft grass. "Yeah," he replied, his voice soft with affection. "In the morning." And as the night stretched on, the two brothers sat in companionable silence, watching over their slumbering friend beneath a blanket of stars, their bond stronger than ever before. As the harsh midday sun beat down upon them, the trio of exhausted boys Ace, Sabo, and Luffy sought refuge under the shade of a nearby tree. Their bodies ached from the rigorous training session against Kaseki's combat robots, leaving them drained both physically and mentally. Amidst their fatigue, Luffy suddenly sat up, a determined glint in his eyes. "Guys," he announced, his voice firm, "I've finally figured out what's been missing all this time." Ace and Sabo turned to their friend, curiosity piqued by his sudden revelation. "What is it, Luffy?" Sabo inquired, his brow furrowing with interest. Luffy took a deep breath, his gaze unwavering as he declared, "A hat, how can I be the king of heroes without a hat?" Sabo, wanting to become a craftsman, seized upon the opportunity to fulfill his friend's wish. With deft hands and a heart full of determination, he set to work, fashioning a hat out of straw. After a few minutes of concentrated effort, Sabo presented the finished hat to Luffy, a proud smile on his face. "There you go, Luffy," he said, his voice filled with satisfaction. "Your very own straw hat." However, as Luffy examined the hat in his hands, a frown creased his brow. "I don't want it," he declared, his voice tinged with disappointment. "It's just a hat." Sabo's smile faltered at Luffy's rejection, a pang of sadness tugging at his heart. He didn't quite understand at first what he meant. But then everything clicked. "Alright, Luffy," Sabo said, his voice thoughtful. "How about this? You keep the hat, and when you've achieved your dream of becoming the king of heroes, you give it back to me." Luffy's eyes widened in surprise at Sabo's offer, a flicker of understanding dawning in his gaze. Slowly, a smile spread across his face, his determination reignited by his friend's words. "Yeah," he replied as he put the straw hat on and began to smile. And with those words, Luffy accepted the hat. A couple of days later. As scorching sun beat down upon the mace, Sabo and Luffy seized a rare opportunity to sneak away from their mentor's watchful eye. Kaseki had fallen into a deep slumber after a particularly exhausting day of experiments, leaving the trio with an irresistible urge to explore the bustling city beyond the confines of their training ground. With a mischievous glint in their eyes, the three friends tiptoed away, their footsteps barely audible against the soft earth. As they left the lab, they began their journey towards the city. For Luffy, it was a thrilling adventure unlike anything he had experienced before. He had never been to the city. His eyes widened in wonder as he took in the sights, his heart racing with excitement. However, as they wandered deeper into the labyrinthine streets, their carefree exploration took a dangerous turn. They found themselves in a dark alley, far removed from the safety of the main thoroughfares. Suddenly, a group of menacing figures emerged from the shadows, their intentions clear as they advanced upon the unsuspecting trio. Ace and Sabo sprang into action, their instincts honed by years of training. But the villains proved to be too numerous, their strength overwhelming. In the chaos of the ensuing struggle, Ace and Sabo were grievously wounded, their bodies battered and broken. Luffy on the other hand wasn't all that hurt thanks to his rubber body and tried his best to fight as well, since the main weapon the villains had were dull. The villains caught onto Luffy's quirk and took out their knives and swords. "Luffy, run. Get out of here as fast as you can," Ace cried out, his voice filled with urgency as he fought to protect his younger brother. But Luffy refused to leave their side, his determination unwavering as he stood his ground against their assailants. As the battle raged on, Luffy went head in to try and save his brothers. But he was stopped by a hero, their figure a beacon of hope amidst the darkness that threatened to engulf them. With a swift motion, the hero dispatched the remaining villains, their movements a blur of speed and precision. But to Luffy's horror, the hero merely glanced at the fallen brothers before turning away, leaving them to their fate. Anguish washed over Luffy as he watched a hero depart, his heart heavy with grief and disbelief. "They were quirkless, those insects aren't worth saving," the hero remarked as he heard Ace and Sabo screaming before that they will defeat the enemy, even if they were quirkless. The hero's words was cutting through the silence like a knife. "You call yourself a hero?" Luffy began ragging, calling him a bunch of insults that were mostly true about as the hero simply replied coldly. "Listen kid, this is the true world, not your fantasy where everybody is equal. The strong survive and that's it. Someone without a quirk can never become strong. If you feel so bad about then why don't you go and try to be the hero instead," the hero said while leaving. The callous indifference of the hero's words only added to Luffy's anguish, his fists clenched in rage as he struggled to comprehend the senseless cruelty of their fate. Tears streamed down his cheeks as he cried out in anguish, his heart torn apart by the cruel twist of fate that had robbed him of his brothers. As he was about to say something, he was stopped by none other than Kaseki, awakened by an alarm of danger, arrived on the scene. He rushed to Luffy's side, gathering the devastated boy into his arms, his own eyes brimming with tears. "He put a tracker on them, BTW. Luffy," Kaseki whispered, his voice choked with emotion. "I'm so sorry." Luffy's tears flowed freely, his grief overwhelming. In the embrace of Kaseki's comforting arms, he trembled with the weight of his sorrow. "I couldn't protect them," Luffy cried out, his voice thick with anguish. "They're dead because of me. I'm too weak." Kaseki's heart ached at Luffy's words, his own tears mingling with those of his young charge. But he knew that he couldn't let Luffy succumb to his despair, not when there was still hope to be found. With a determined resolve, Kaseki pulled away from Luffy's embrace, his hands gripping the boy's shoulders with gentle yet firm strength. And then, with a swift motion, he delivered a stinging slap across Luffy's cheek. "Don't you ever think they are dead," Kaseki admonished, his voice sharp with urgency. "A man never dies until he is forgotten. As long as there's someone in this world who's able to fulfill their dream, they are not dead." Luffy recoiled from the force of the blow, his cheek stinging with the imprint of Kaseki's hand. But as he met Kaseki's unwavering gaze, he saw the truth in his old man's words. Slowly, the storm of his emotions began to subside, replaced by a flicker of hope that burned bright within him. With Kaseki's words echoing in his mind, Luffy took a shaky breath, his resolve strengthening with every heartbeat. He was always called a crybaby. So he wiped his tears in bravery as he passed out. We finally received a full explanation of what Vegapunk meant by the world will sink into the ocean. With these new details, I want to enrich the story in my fanfiction and perhaps adjust the timeline to better align with scientific principles. We now know that Joy Boy was the first person to be recognized as a pirate. During the Void Century, he fought against an enemy organization known as the World Government. However, back then, it wasn't a permanent organization, but rather a temporary coalition of 20 nations. These 20 nations united to defeat a single kingdom, which was Joy Boy's homeland. The Void Century culminated in Joy Boy's defeat. During that century, the sea levels rose by 200 meters. This phenomenon also explains how a century's worth of history could be erased or censored. However, this wasn't a natural disaster, it was clearly a man-made calamity. Records from centuries earlier may have warned of impending danger, but it was a severe, world-altering event nonetheless. Joy Boy's defeat coincided with the world sinking into the ocean. Before the Void Century, there were many more continents, making travel between islands and continents extremely easy. With such connectivity, people worldwide could share their cultures. Joy Boy's actions of freeing slaves and spreading his ideology posed a significant threat, leading to a century-long war. But that war didn't truly end. 900 years later, a similar conflict arose. Joy Boy had seemingly returned Monkey D. Luffy. Luffy accomplished many feats before humanity faced its doom. He destroyed Fishman Island and brought its people to the surface, demolished the Red Line, defeated the world government, and achieved his ultimate dream. To bring a new era to humanity. An era of freedom. However, just as he completed his dreams, the damage caused by the ancient weapons was too extensive to repair. Mother Nature had the final say. As one last cataclysmic event struck, the sea levels rose by another 100 meters. This is where I'll adjust the timeline. Instead of the note or message from the people of Skypia being 40 years apart from Gold Roger's message, I'll place it about 700 years apart. After 700 years, a civilization that had lived in the sky returned to Earth and inscribed a message. We are all alone. Natural disasters and meteors had drastically altered the world, causing sea levels to drop over thousands of years. The world began to resemble the pre-Void Century era, with numerous continents, easy travel, and a rich mix of cultures. A new age of history began. The modern age. But the mystery of the erased history from long ago remained unsolved for the current world. I wonder. Will he ever find out? Luffy woke up with a start, his stomach growling loudly. He rubbed his eyes and sat up, glancing around the small room he was in. The familiar sight of Kaseki's workshop brought a small measure of comfort. He could smell the tantalizing aroma of food, and his stomach growled even louder. I'm hungry, Luffy declared, his voice sounding sad from the events that had transpired. Kaseki, who had been sitting by Luffy's side, watching over him, gave a small, sad smile. He handed Luffy a plate piled high with meat, Luffy's favorite dish. Here, eat up, he said gently. Luffy didn't need to be told twice. He dug into the food with his usual gusto, but as he ate, tears began to stream down his cheeks. The memories of Ace and Sabo, their laughter, their dreams, and their final moments haunted him. He couldn't help but feel the weight of their loss pressing down on him. Kaseki watched Luffy, his own heart heavy with sorrow. He placed a comforting hand on Luffy's shoulder. A man will always die, Luffy, fighting for third dream is the most honorable death known to man, because you don't actually die, he said softly. They're not truly gone. As long as we remember them and strive to fulfill their dreams, they're still with us. Luffy looked up at Kaseki, his eyes filled with a mixture of pain and determination. He swallowed the lump in his throat and nodded, wiping away his tears with the back of his hand. You're right, they aren't dead. Kaseki nodded, a proud smile forming on his lips. That's the spirit, Luffy. Luffy took a deep breath, his resolve hardening. He immediately tried to stand up on the bed, his mind set on action. However, as soon as he moved, a sharp pain shot through his body, reminding him of his injuries. Kaseki quickly placed a hand on Luffy's shoulder, gently pushing him back down. Easy there, Luffy, Kaseki said softly. You're still hurt. Recovery Girl couldn't heal you completely because you didn't have enough energy left. Luffy's eyes, despite the pain, sparkled with determination. He looked at Kaseki, his heart swelling with the memory of Ace and Sabo. He knew the final touch to his dream. With a broad, confident smile spreading across his face, Luffy took a deep breath and, ignoring the pain, shouted with all his might, I'm gonna be. His voice echoed through the room, filled with unwavering resolve and the promise of a brighter future. As Luffy laughed, the sound filled the room with warmth and joy. Kaseki couldn't help but feel a wave of nostalgia wash over him. In that moment, Kaseki remembered the blueprints. The warrior of liberation. This man would play the fool to catch the wise, his laughter and seeming foolishness, masking a deep wisdom and strength. He would make others smile, no matter the cost. Seeing Luffy now, with his indomitable spirit and infectious laughter, Kaseki realized that his experiment had not been a failure. He had succeeded beyond his wildest dreams. Luffy was the embodiment of those blueprints, the very essence of the man Kaseki had admired and sought to create. Kaseki's laughed as he looked at Luffy. A man can be greedy, but two dreams is almost laughable. Luffy continued to laugh, his energy and enthusiasm undiminished despite his injuries. Kaseki's heart swelled with hope and pride, knowing that Luffy would carry the torch of their shared dream forward, lighting the way to a brighter future for all. I'm not a fortune teller or anything. I'm just a normal man. But as your old man, I have a dream of my own, Kaseki said, looking up at the ceiling. Yes, I'm a greedy man too, he laughed, revealing he had two dreams as well. I will discover what happened 3,700 years ago. And I will keep the promise I made to your mother. Luffy looked confused at Kaseki. I have a mother? This made Kaseki laugh out loud. You idiot, he said, his voice filled with affection. Luffy, getting annoyed, shot back, old man. Their playful argument continued, with Luffy pouting and Kaseki teasing, until Recovery Girl entered the room and whacked Kaseki on his legs with her cane. Always picking on kids, have you no shame? She scolded. Shut up, old lady, Kaseki retorted. Aren't you old too? She shot back. No. You're acting like a kid again. You're in your 50s. A man doesn't have to act like a man to be a man. Isn't that right, Luffy? Kaseki said, turning to Luffy. But Luffy, who hadn't been paying attention to their conversation, had already fallen asleep the moment Recovery Girl entered the room. Kaseki cursed silently under his breath. Recovery Girl smiled gently and began to heal all of Luffy's injuries. As she worked, Kaseki explained the situation to her, his voice heavy with sorrow. Recovery Girl's expression softened as she said he's strong, but even the strongest need time to heal. Kaseki sighed deeply, his eyes fixed on Luffy's sleeping form. I promised his mother I would make him the free-set man. No matter what it takes. Recovery Girl continued her healing, her hands glowing softly. He has a long journey ahead, but with you by his side, he'll make it through. A mix of determination and fatigue in his eyes. Is that a compliment? Oh, old lady, have you finally seen the potential in me, he said with an evil grin as Recovery Girl just smiled. As Recovery Girl finished her work, she patted Kaseki on the shoulder. Take care of yourself too. He needs you to be strong. Kaseki watched her leave, his thoughts heavy with the promise he had made and the challenges ahead. Another 3 years. Luffy, now 9 years old, had shown remarkable progress in his training. It was as if everything he practiced was something he already had mastered. While he still struggled with accuracy and precision in his attacks, his strength had greatly improved. He was now on par with Kaseki in terms of physical prowess. A few months after his 9th birthday, a sudden incident occurred. Luffy was accidentally exposed to radioactive radiation. Thankfully, no physical damage was apparent, but something unexpected happened. Immediately after being hit, Luffy turned to Kaseki with wide eyes and exclaimed, I remember everything now. Confused and alarmed, Kaseki listened as Luffy began to recount tales of adventures, battles, and distant lands. At first, Kaseki dismissed it as the ramblings of a child's imagination. But as Luffy continued to speak with clarity and detail, Kaseki's skepticism waned. Could it be possible? Could Luffy truly remember past experiences? As Kaseki pondered this revelation, a thought struck him. Perhaps the blueprints, could they also hold memories of the life of the man Monkey D. Luffy? With newfound determination, Kaseki delved deeper into his research. He asked Luffy about his so-called adventures, but they all seemed rather unbelievable. An elephant with an island on its back. Giants. Fish people. All traces of humanity, bones and all, were erased by the chemicals the extinct Sebists held. So there was no way to confirm if he was speaking the truth. But he decided to believe Luffy. After all, people lived in the sky at that time, so why not? Meanwhile, Luffy's abilities continued to grow. With each passing day, he displayed a level of skill and intuition that surpassed his age. It was as if the experiences he remembered were ingrained in his very being, guiding his actions and shaping his destiny. One random day. Luffy was sprawled on the couch, completely engrossed in his favorite pirate-themed TV show. Suddenly, as he watched the swashbuckling adventures unfold on the screen, a mischievous idea popped into his head. With a burst of energy, he leapt up from the couch and dashed towards Kaseki, who was deeply absorbed in his latest invention. Old man, I'm sick of staying here all day, Luffy declared dramatically, his voice echoing through the laboratory. Can't we go on an adventure? Kaseki looked up from his work, his eyebrows raised in surprise at Luffy's sudden outburst. An adventure. He repeated, a hint of amusement in his voice. What do you mean, Luffy? Luffy's eyes gleamed with excitement as he considered the possibilities. But he still had no idea. I dunno, he exclaimed, somewhere fun. Kiseki couldn't help but laugh at Luffy's enthusiasm. Only if you keep the promise of staying out of trouble, he conceded, a smile tugging at the corners of his lips. But first, we'll need disguises. We can't risk being recognized. Luffy looked confused. Disguises? Why? Because your old man is famous. Oh, is it because you're mad? Luffy said, laughing as Kiseki screamed. Get ready before I change my mind, you brat. And so, with their plan was in place, Luffy and Kiseki set to work on their disguises. Luffy's costume consisted of a ridiculously oversized wig with a pair of sunglasses that were several sizes too big for his face, giving him a comically exaggerated appearance. Kiseki's disguise was equally absurd, a fake mustache that drooped down to his chin, paired with a pair of oversized glasses and a floppy hat that threatened to slide off his head with every step. Together, they looked like a pair of bumbling detectives from a cheesy detective movie, ready to solve the silliest of mysteries. As they stepped out of the laboratory, Luffy couldn't contain his excitement. He bounced on the balls of his feet, his oversized wig bobbing with each movement. "Let's go, old man," he exclaimed, his voice filled with anticipation. Kiseki chuckled at Luffy's exuberance as they made their way towards the car. He climbed into the driver's seat, adjusting his floppy hat as he started the engine. "Seatbelt, Luffy," he said with a grin. "It's going to be quite the ride." Luffy eagerly buckled himself in, his eyes sparkling with excitement as they pulled out onto the open road. As they drove towards town, Luffy's gaze darted eagerly from side to side, taking in the sights and sounds of the world outside the laboratory. Suddenly, his eyes lit up as they passed by a colorful playground nestled in a nearby park. "Hey, old man, can we stop there?" he asked eagerly, pointing towards the playground with excitement. Kiseki glanced over at Luffy, a smile playing on his lips. "Fine, Luffy," he replied, turning the car towards the park. As they pulled into the parking lot, Luffy practically leaped out of the car, his laughter ringing out as he raced towards the swings. "Somewhere in the park. Why are you being so mean? You're making him cry, Kaken. If you keep on hurting him, I'll stop you myself," the green-haired boy exclaimed, his voice trembling with defiance as he attempted to shield a smaller kid from the relentless bullying. The main bully, Kaken, sneered in response. "You want to pretend to be a hero? You don't stand a chance without a quirk, Deku," he taunted, his cronies echoing his disdainful laughter as they continued their torment. Once the bullies finally left, leaving behind a trail of tears and bruised spirits, Luffy approached the green-haired boy who remained on the ground, his spirit unbroken, but his resolve wavering. "What are you doing on the ground?" Luffy asked, his tone gentle yet laced with curiosity as he surveyed the scene before him. The green-haired boy looked up, surprise flickering across his features as he met Luffy's gaze. I was trying to protect him," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper as he gestured towards the smaller kid who now sat huddled against the wall, eyes wide with fear. A soft chuckle escaped Luffy's lips, amusement dancing in his eyes as he extended a hand to help the green-haired boy up. "You're really dumb, huh?" he teased, his words tinged with affection as he regarded the boy with genuine admiration. As the boy struggled to his feet, his eyes widened in astonishment at Luffy's next words. "You remind me of someone, what was his name again?" "Oh yeah, Kobe," Luffy exclaimed, a fond smile playing on his lips as he recalled memories of his own past adventures. The green-haired boy blinked in confusion, his mind racing as he tried to process Luffy's unexpected declaration. "Who are you? And why are you wearing that?" he asked, his voice tinged with curiosity and a hint of skepticism. Luffy's grin widened at the boy's incredulous expression. "My name is Monkey D. Luffy, and I'm going to become the king of the heroes," he proclaimed proudly, his eyes sparkling with determination as he threw caution to the wind and revealed his true identity. "And I'm wearing a disguise. No one's gonna know who I am." The green-haired boy wiped away his tears, a sense of wonder filling his heart as he listened to Luffy's words. "You want to become a hero too?" he asked, his voice tinged with hope and uncertainty. "Nah, being a hero isn't for me. I'm more of a pirate," Luffy replied with a laugh, his carefree demeanor masking the weight of his own ambitions and dreams. "A villain?" the boy ventured tentatively, his curiosity piqued by Luffy's enigmatic presence. "You decide that." "I don't care," he said with a mischievous twinkle in his eye, his words carrying a hint of playful defiance as he dared the boy to challenge his unconventional worldview. "You don't seem like one," the little boy said as he hesitated, his mind racing with conflicting emotions and desires. "I want to become a hero, but I'm quirkless," he confessed, his voice barely above a whisper as he bared his soul to this newfound companion. Luffy's response was swift and decisive, a playful smack on the head, accompanied by words of reassurance and encouragement. "Are you an idiot or something? Who cares if you don't have a power?" he chided, his laughter ringing out like a beacon of hope in the darkness. "Ow." The boy protested, rubbing his head as he grappled with the weight of Luffy's words. Could it be true? Could he truly become a hero, even without a quirk? I knew two people that were quirkless, and they were stronger than me. They wanted to become heroes too, Luffy reassured him, his voice filled with conviction and unwavering faith in the power of friendship and determination. You're saying I can become a hero? Even though I'm quirkless? The boy asked, disbelief evident in his voice as he dared to hope for a brighter future. Why not? I mean, aren't you already a hero? Luffy replied, his smile infectious as Kaseki arrived with ice cream, interrupting their conversation with a sense of urgency. The boy couldn't believe his ears, was he just called a hero? But his excitement turned into disbelief. The little boy's eyes widened in recognition as he spotted Kaseki, his thoughts racing as he struggled to reconcile the man before him with the rumors and stories he had heard. Dr. Kaseki? He ventured tentatively, his voice tinged with uncertainty as he sought confirmation of his suspicions. But Kaseki merely shook his head, he ushered Luffy away with a sense of urgency. Nope, kid, you've got the wrong person. Now, bye, he said with a wink, his actions shrouded in mystery as he whisked Luffy away into the waiting car, leaving behind a sense of wonder and possibility in his wake. This has been the weirdest day in my life. But today was awesome. I got called a hero. The little boy said as he rushed to tell his mom that someone called him a hero today. 3 years had passed since that strange and fateful day when Luffy met Izuku Midoriya. Luffy had now turned 13, and on his birthday, a shocking truth was discovered. All for One had been defeated. This news came through Dr. Kaseki, who had received it from a close and trusted contact. The defeat of All for One meant that Kaseki and Luffy were finally free to wander without the constant paranoia of being found. For most of his young life, Luffy wasn't allowed to leave the forest they called home. Despite this restriction, he often snuck out, becoming known as the meat thief that many wannabe heroes tried and failed to catch. His identity remained a secret, a ghostly figure that no one could pin down. But now, with the threat of All for One gone, Luffy was free to walk wherever he wanted. There was only one rule that Kaseki insisted on. Don't cause trouble. Kaseki had no desire to attract unwanted attention. Luffy's training had been going surprisingly well. He had mastered his aim with his rubber body, a testament to his relentless determination and natural talent. However, there was one challenge he had yet to overcome. While training with the robots Kaseki had built, Luffy struggled to defeat the final robot boss. He knew he needed to learn a new technique to succeed, but the robot's speed was insufficient to push him further. Luffy blindfolded himself, he focused his senses, relying on his instincts. Yet, despite his efforts, the training robots were too slow and predictable. Frustration bubbled within him as he dodged their sluggish attacks with ease. Kaseki observed Luffy's struggles with a keen eye, noting the boy's growing frustration. What are you doing, Luffy? I'm trying to learn hockey. I need to get stronger, or I'll never be able to defeat that robot. Hockey? What's that? It's this amazing power that lets you sense things, fight better, and even hit your enemies without touching them. How is that even possible? Kaseki thought as he decided to observe Luffy instead. He knew Luffy's answer wouldn't help him one bit. Why are you so frustrated then? If you want to take out the robot, why don't you use gear 2 or 3? Kaseki asked, knowing Luffy had shown him these powerful techniques before. I don't want to rely too much on my quirk. Besides, who doesn't like a challenge? Shishishi, Luffy said, laughing. So, what's the problem then? They're too slow and too predictable, Luffy lamented, his voice tinged with frustration. Kaseki nodded thoughtfully. I guess I can help, he declared, a spark of excitement in his eyes. Really? How? You'll know, Kaseki replied with a mysterious smile. But before that, tell me everything you know about hockey. The next day, an old man arrived at Kaseki's lab. His arrival was quiet, almost ghostly, as if he had just appeared out of thin air. Luffy stared at him, puzzled and slightly amused. Who is this old geezer? He muttered under his breath, his eyes narrowing in curiosity. The old man stood there, seemingly lost in thought. His eyes were half closed, giving the impression that he was either deeply meditating or on the verge of falling asleep while standing. Kaseki's face lit up with a welcoming smile. This is your new trainer, Gran Torino, he announced, turning to the old man. And you know him, old man. This is Monkey D. Luffy. The introduction seemed to jolt Gran Torino awake. What did you say his name was again? Gran Torino asked, his voice a mix of confusion and curiosity. Luffy, Kaseki repeated patiently. Sorry, what now? Gran Torino leaned closer, cupping his ear as if he was hard of hearing. Luffy, old man, Kaseki said louder, trying to stifle a laugh. Gran Torino nodded slowly, then turned to Luffy. So what's your name, boy? He asked, his tone teasing yet serious. Luffy couldn't help but burst into laughter. That old man is a hero. Kaseki chuckled along. If you don't think so, then try and hit him. Luffy's eyes gleamed with excitement as he accepted the challenge without hesitation. He lunged at Gran Torino, his movement swift and powerful. But before he could land a hit, Gran Torino vanished from sight. Luffy stumbled forward, off balance, his eyes wide with shock. An instant later, Gran Torino reappeared behind him, delivering a quick tap on Luffy's head with a grin. "What the?" Luffy exclaimed, rubbing his head, more surprised than hurt. "You've got potential, but you were holding back. It's time to show me what you can do, you newbie," Gran Torino said in a playful yet challenging tone. Kiseki stepped forward, holding a blindfold in his hand. "Put this on," Luffy tried to dodge and hit Gran Torino. Gran Torino looked confused for a moment. "Luffy could easily hit you with his second gear, but he's relying too much on his quirk," Kiseki explained. "Therefore, he needs to learn a new technique called haki." Gran Torino's eyes twinkled with interest. "Impressive, but what is haki?" Kiseki smiled, enjoying the opportunity to teach. "From what I understand, haki is no different than human instincts. Haki is a power that lies dormant in all the world's creatures. Presence, fighting spirit, and intimidation. There are 3 types of haki. Armament, which is like an invisible shield covering your body, observation, which is like a sixth sense, and conqueror's haki, which lets you knock out people with weak wills." "Wow, and to think humans had this ability all the time," Gran Torino mused. "Well, 3,700 years ago they did. But now most of humanity has completely lost the will to do so, perhaps some can," Kiseki explained, his tone turning more serious. Gran Torino nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. He knew Luffy's story well. Luffy, growing impatient, blurted out, "Can we start already?" "Alright, Luffy, dodge 100 times," Kiseki instructed, handing him the blindfold. Luffy took the blindfold and tied it around his eyes, blocking out his vision. He took a deep breath, preparing himself to rely solely on his instincts. He shifted into a ready stance, muscles tensed and senses heightened. But no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't dodge. Gran Torino's speed and agility were unmatched, his movements a blur to the blindfolded Luffy. Luffy found himself getting hit repeatedly, each tap a reminder of how far he still had to go. Frustration grew within him, but so did his determination. Luffy's past experiences had taught him that true growth came from overcoming challenges. He knew he had a lot to learn, just like he did before, but now it felt like he had to learn it all over again, this time with a new perspective and a fresh start. After several more attempts, Luffy was still struggling. His movements were erratic and he couldn't seem to focus. Gran Torino watched him with a keen eye, sensing the boy's frustration. Then, a mischievous grin spread across the old man's face. Gran Torino hopped onto a nearby table, striking a dramatic pose. "Luffy, my boy, you remind me of a story," he declared. Luffy paused, panting heavily. "What story?" he asked, puzzled. Gran Torino continued with exaggerated theatrics. "Once upon a time, there was a squirrel who couldn't find his nuts because he was too busy chasing his own tail." Luffy blinked, confusion evident on his face. "What does that have to do with anything?" Gran Torino, undeterred, produced a peanut from his pocket and tossed it in the air. "Be the squirrel, Luffy. But don't chase your tail. Find your nuts." He then dramatically pretended to chase his own tail, spinning in circles and nearly falling off the table. Luffy stared at the spectacle, bewildered, then burst out laughing. "So you're saying I'm like a squirrel chasing my tail?" Gran Torino nodded, a satisfied smirk on his face. "Exactly. Now, focus on me. Don't think about anything else. Just react." The training continued. "Ouch. I'm made out of rubber, I shouldn't be feeling these," Luffy muttered, rubbing his head. The real culprit, Kiseki, was standing nearby with a smirk on his face. He had sneakily put sea salt on Gran Torino's boots, weakening Luffy's rubber body. Gran Torino, surprisingly, was smiling as he watched the interaction. His eyes twinkled with a mix of amusement and pride. "Kiseki, you've raised one hell of a monster. He might be," he thought to himself. As Gran Torino approached Luffy, his gaze softening as he looked at Luffy. "Luffy," he began, his voice carrying a weight of responsibility, "I have a request for you. You've shown incredible potential, and I believe you could be the next user of One for All. This power has been passed down through generations to fight against the greatest evil. Will you accept this responsibility and carry on this legacy?" Luffy looked at Gran Torino, his usual carefree expression turned serious for a moment. He shook his head, smiling. "No way, I've got my own journey and my own dreams. I want to be the king of heroes, not a hero. Shush, besides I want to be free." Gran Torino laughed. "Fair enough, kid." Months passed since Luffy began his intense training with Gran Torino. Each day was filled with grueling exercises and relentless challenges designed to push him to his limits. The once light-hearted sessions became more serious as Luffy's determination grew stronger. He spent hours each day blindfolded, learning to rely on his instincts and honing his haki. Gran Torino was a relentless but fair teacher, always pushing Luffy to do better while throwing in the occasional humorous comment or bizarre training method to keep things interesting. Despite the harsh training, Luffy never lost his spirit. He faced each setback with a grin and a renewed resolve to overcome it. The lab had become a hub of activity, with Kaseki and Gran Torino constantly monitoring Luffy's progress and adjusting his training regimen. Kaseki was always there to provide support, offer insights, and occasionally sneak in a prank or two to keep Luffy on his toes. The bond between the three grew stronger, united by their common goal. One evening, after months of relentless practice, the lab was filled with a tense but hopeful atmosphere. Luffy stood in the center of the training area, blindfolded and ready. His senses were sharper than ever, his body tuned to the slightest changes in the environment. Gran Torino and Kaseki watched with bated breath. Gran Torino darted around Luffy, his movements a blur. But this time, Luffy was different. He moved with a fluid grace, dodging each of Gran Torino's taps with precision. His haki had developed to the point where he could sense Gran Torino's movements before they happened, allowing him to react almost instinctively. That's 10. 20. 30. Kaseki counted aloud, his excitement growing with each successful dodge. Luffy's confidence grew with each passing second. He could feel Gran Torino's presence with clarity, the air shifting with his movements, the faint sounds of his footsteps. Luffy danced around the training area, dodging each tap with ease. 50. 60. 70. Kaseki continued, his voice trembling with anticipation. Gran Torino increased his speed, determined to test Luffy's limits. But Luffy was ready. He moved with a newfound precision, his body reacting faster than his mind could process. He was in the zone, fully immersed in the moment. 80. 90. Kaseki's voice was barely a whisper now, filled with awe. Finally, Gran Torino launched a rapid series of taps, his movements almost too fast to see. But Luffy dodged them all, his body moving in perfect harmony with his instincts. 100. Kaseki shouted, his voice echoing through the lab. He did it. Luffy pulled off the blindfold, a wide grin spreading across his face. I did it. He yelled, pumping his fists in the air. His body was covered in sweat and his muscles ached, but the sense of accomplishment was overwhelming. Just as Luffy was about to celebrate with meat further, Kaseki clapped a hand on his shoulder, his expression serious. Don't celebrate just yet, Luffy. You've mastered observation haki, but you still need to learn the other two forms of haki. Armament and Conquerors. And the advanced versions as well. Months turned into 3 to 4 years as Luffy continued his rigorous training with Gran Torino and Kaseki, honing his skills and mastering the three forms of haki. Each day was a new challenge, but Luffy's determination never wavered. He began with armament haki, learning to harden his body to make his attacks more powerful and his defenses nearly impenetrable. Gran Torino's methods were unorthodox but effective. Luffy spent countless hours sparring, his fists coated in the invisible armor of haki, clashing against Gran Torino's own hardened strikes. The training was intense, but Luffy's willpower and resilience saw him through. Gran Torino often employed bizarre but memorable training techniques. One particularly grueling exercise involved Luffy punching through solid steel beams, which Kaseki assured were infused with special materials to enhance haki training. Every successful hit made Luffy's armament haki stronger until he could break through the toughest defenses with ease. Next came Conqueror's haki, the most challenging of all. Luffy had to learn to project his willpower to overpower others, a skill that required immense mental fortitude. Gran Torino guided him through meditation exercises, helping him focus his inner strength. Luffy practiced by exerting his willpower on wild animals and eventually on groups of trainees, learning to control the overwhelming force without causing harm. Gran Torino's methods were again unorthodox. One memorable day, he had Luffy stand at the center of a crowded marketplace, using his Conqueror's haki to create a path through the throng without uttering a word. It took weeks, but Luffy eventually mastered the ability to project his will, clearing the way effortlessly and commanding respect through sheer presence. During his intense training, Luffy focused on improving his devil fruit powers. Inspired by his mastery of haki, he experimented with combining his rubber abilities with armament haki, leading to the creation of Gear 4th. By inflating his muscles and coating them in haki, Luffy increased his strength and speed, transforming into Bounceman. This breakthrough took countless hours of experimentation, resulting in different forms within Gear 4th, like Tankman for defense and Snakeman for agility. Gran Torino and Kaseki were amazed, providing guidance until Gear 4th became a crucial part of Luffy's arsenal. It was an ordinary day in the lab, or so they thought, until an unexpected accident changed everything. Luffy, in the midst of an experiment, was struck by a powerful blast of radioactive radiation. This time it was different, it wasn't his mind that remembered, but his body did. His body remembered everything that happened in the past. Suddenly his heart began to pound like drums, resonating through the room. In an instant, his hair and clothes turned a brilliant shade of white, a stark contrast to his usual appearance. And then, with a laugh that echoed through the lab, Luffy's transformation was complete. Kaseki's eyes widened in astonishment, a smile slowly spreading across his face. "The blueprints," he muttered, his mind racing with newfound understanding. In a flash of realization, he remembered the cryptic blueprints of life he had stumbled upon in the forest, and suddenly it all made sense. As Luffy's laughter filled the room, Kaseki's expression transformed from shock to awe. He watched with a mixture of fascination and pride as Luffy's movements caused the floor beneath him to stretch and bounce like rubber. It was as if the very essence of life itself was manifesting in front of him. Gran Torino, witnessing the spectacle before him, could only stare in disbelief. So this is the true extent of his powers. He mused aloud, his mind reeling with the implications of Luffy's transformation. It was clear that they had only scratched the surface of what Luffy was truly capable of. His true limit is his imagination. Before Luffy's power could only be influenced by others' imagination and his own. But he couldn't yet influence others. But now he can. Making everything rubber. Perhaps he can even create things with his imagination. I'll look into it later. As Luffy reveled in the power of Gear 5, a familiar sensation disrupted him, a sudden rumbling, the unmistakable growl of hunger echoing through the room. Ignored amidst the excitement, his stomach now demanded attention. With a sudden shift, the vibrant colors and whiteness of his transformation faded, leaving him drained and weary, his body resembling that of an old man. Gran Torino and Kaseki, concerned, rushed to his side, steadying him as he wavered. "You pushed yourself too far, Luffy," Gran Torino remarked, his voice tinged with worry. "Even the strongest warriors need to rest and eat." Nodding in agreement, Kaseki guided Luffy to a nearby table piled high with food. As he devoured the meal before him, the exhaustion began to lift, replaced by a renewed sense of energy. His training was finally complete. 10 months before entrance exam. "When I was just 4 years old, I met the sad truth that all men are not created equal, yet someone still called me a hero that day. Ever since that moment, I've never lost hope, no matter how bad things seemed. Honestly, it's a little crazy that Japan's most wanted vigilante and villain was the one who called me a hero," he thought, staring intently at his phone screen. Thousands of headlines speculated about the true nature of the Straw Hat Man's quirk. Some witnesses spotted his arm stretching like rubber, others saw one of his body parts turn jet black, and a few claimed he could knock down people with just a single intimidating glare. It was one of the biggest mysteries plaguing the nation. Many people jumped to the conclusion that he must have multiple quirks, but the truth was still unknown to society at large. The hot topic dominating news cycles these days was the ongoing debate. Is Monkey D. Luffy a vigilante working outside the law, or is he simply a villain? He was caught on camera beating up villains and heroes, but then other footage showed him saving innocent civilians from harm. But the most viral clip of all was a bystander calling him a hero after he intervened. "You're a hero?" the woman cried out. "I'm not a hero," Luffy snapped at her, his voice filled with irritation. "But you just saved me. I'm a pirate. Geez, what's up with people always calling me a hero? I want to be the king of heroes, not a hero," he declared like everybody was an idiot for not understanding. That one line alone left the entire nation of Japan utterly confused. He wants to become a hero without actually being a hero. And nobody had ever heard of this King of Heroes title before. What was that even supposed to mean? Despite numerous attempts by pro-heroes, he remained impossible to capture or unmask, vanishing without a trace every single time. That's when the prestigious hero course at UA High had enough and sent the legendary All Might himself to finally apprehend Monkey D. Luffy once and for all. But for some unknown reason, Luffy managed to evade the symbol of peace repeatedly, he would always vanish. Everyone assumed he must have been terrified of facing All Might's overwhelming power, as any wanted criminal would be. But something deep within Izuku's instincts told him otherwise. He doesn't seem the type to be easily scared, even of All Might. But then again, All Might is the #1 hero, the most powerful of them all. "No matter what anyone thinks of me, I have to believe in myself and keep smiling, just like them both," he declared, determination burning in his eyes. A day later. Izuku Midoriya hurried home from school, his mind filled with dreams of becoming a hero, despite being born without a quirk. As he walked through a tunnel, a sinister figure emerged from the shadows, a monstrous villain made entirely of sludge. The villain lunged at Izuku, intent on taking over his body. "This will make do of a vessel." And it gripped Izuku as the villain ensnared him, choking off his air and any hope of escape. Just when it seemed all was lost, a booming voice echoed through the tunnel, followed by a powerful gust of wind. The symbol of peace, All Might, had arrived. With a single mighty punch, All Might dispersed the sludge villain, freeing Izuku. Coughing and gasping for breath, Izuku looked up in awe at his lifelong idol. All Might beamed down at him, his presence radiating hope. After collecting the scattered remains of the villain into plastic bottles, All Might prepared to leap away to deliver the fiend to the police. But Izuku, driven by a burning question, couldn't let this chance slip by. As All Might soared into the air, Izuku latched onto his leg, his heart pounding as they ascended higher and higher. All Might noticed the extra weight and glanced down, surprised to see the determined boy clinging to him. The wind whipped around them as they flew above the city. All Might landed gently on a rooftop, carefully setting Izuku down. No matter what anyone thinks of me, I have to believe in myself and keep smiling, just like them both, he declared, determination burning in his eyes. Despite everything, my dream to become a hero still lives on, and I have to know. His voice began to tremble as tears welled up. Is it still possible for me to become a hero, even if I don't have a quirk? Izuku was just a normal quirkless kid, but that random stranger calling him a hero had given him a glimmer of hope that he clung to desperately. I'm asking you, could I ever hope to be someone like you, All Might? Without a quirk. All Might repeated, a sharp pain lancing through his body, almost like a heart attack. Smoke began seeping out as his muscular form started deflating right before Izuku's eyes. People always tell me I don't have any chance at being a hero. They say I'm just too weak and useless. Maybe that's why I'm always getting made fun of and bullied. But I still think the idea of saving people with a big fearless smile is just so cool. I want to be able to laugh in the face of danger and become the greatest hero, just like you. Izuku's voice rang out with passion as he gazed at the shriveled, sickly form of All Might with shock and confusion. What? No way. You can't be. He looked around wildly. Huh? Did someone make a fake All Might doll? This has to be a joke. You're so skinny and frail. No, I am the real All Might, the hero admitted, coughing up a small splatter of blood, his body was completely deflated. And there's plenty of fear behind that smile I wear, All Might said with a weary sigh, his voice gravelly. Then All Might began to recount the story of how he sustained a devastating injury 5 years prior that destroyed his respiratory system. As a result, he could only maintain his famous muscle form for about 3 hours each day before reverting to this withered state. I'm supposed to be the indomitable symbol of peace that everyone looks up to, the guy who's always ready with a reassuring smile, right? People everywhere across the world have to think that I'm never afraid, that I'm invincible. But honestly, I constantly smile to hide the fear that's always inside me. This brave heroic mask I wear is just a front I put on when the pressure gets too high. All Might then looked Izuku directly in the eyes with the utmost seriousness. The life of a pro hero isn't an easy one. We're always having to risk our lives, putting ourselves in the path of deadly danger. Some villains and threats are just too powerful to be beaten without the aid of a strong quirk. It's impossible to become a hero without a quirk of your own. The hard truth struck Izuku like a punch to the gut. He had idolized this man for as long as he could remember, and now that same hero was telling him point-blank that his lifelong dream could never become a reality. I see, Izuku said, the words feeling like dust in his mouth as his voice came out crushed and deflated. Whatever All Might tried to say after that was just white noise to Izuku's ears. His mind went completely blank as the world around him faded into a blur. All Might eventually departed, leaving Izuku alone with some final half-hearted words about potential career paths for someone quirkless like himself. Then, just as numbness began to settle in, a massive explosion rocked the street, plumes of smoke billowing up in the distance. It snapped Izuku back to alertness as his head whipped around, drawn to the source of danger like a moth to a flame. He was about to check the situation out and analyze what heroes might do in that situation when All Might's words hit him and he let it go and walked away. Where the explosion came from. How dare you take a child hostage? You coward. A hero yelled as he hit the sludge villain, but to his surprise, his hand began pulling into the sludge villain. I can't grab a hold. The hero said as he struggled to free his arm, but he was soon hit by the sludge villain, sending him flying into a wall. Don't come near me. The sludge villain growled as the child hostage struggled. I won't let sewage like this swallow me. The child said, using his explosion quirk, but it didn't work. It made things worse, spreading the fire even farther. What a powerful quirk. I've really hit the jackpot. With this quirk and power, I can get revenge on that guy, the sludge villain gloated. Soon, a rookie hero named Mount Lady arrived, but she stopped before she could reach the villain. This went on for minutes. No one was able to save the child, no one with the right quirk could defeat the sludge villain. One of the heroes even bet that every hero in the city would come. All Might arrived at the scene, but he couldn't do anything. Meanwhile, Izuku's mind was racing with memories of people telling him he could never be a hero. But there was one comfort, he couldn't stop thinking about that one time he was called a hero. Even All Might said it, a hero needs a quirk. Don't cry, damn it. Deep down you knew this all along. You've just been avoiding reality. That's why you've been so desperately trying to prove yourself wrong. I'm not a hero, damn it. Why would he ever call me that? he said as his thoughts were interrupted by an explosion. That's strange, is the fight from earlier still going on? He wondered aloud. Why am I even here? Did I subconsciously walk over here to check it out? He said as he saw what all the fuss was about. That can't be right. The sludge villain from before. All Might captured him. Then he remembered. The bottle. If he dropped it, that means it's my fault, he realized. Everyone was wondering where All Might was, but in reality, he was in the crowd, unable to do anything in his weak form. Izuku blamed himself, cursing himself. I'm sorry, so sorry, he muttered. As he was blaming himself and thinking, some hero will come soon. The sludge villain's ominous presence loomed over the street, casting a dark shadow over the desperate attempts of the heroes to rescue the trapped child. Izuku's heart raced as he watched the chaos unfold, his mind torn between fear and a gnawing sense of duty. His eyes darted from one hero to another, each struggling against the villain's relentless grip. With a trembling breath, Izuku stepped forward, his gaze locked on the captive. His legs moved almost of their own accord, driven by an inexplicable need to help, to make a difference. A nearby hero shot him a warning look. Stop, you idiot. You're gonna get yourself killed. They shouted, but Izuku couldn't turn back now. As he approached, the sludge villain's attention shifted, a sneer twisting its slimy features as it recognized Izuku. What's this, another pesky insect buzzing around? It taunted, tendrils of sludge reaching out menacingly. Ignoring the villain's threats, Izuku's mind raced. What would a hero do in this situation? His eyes flickered to his notebook, filled with detailed analyses of hero tactics and strategies. Take this. Izuku shouted, hurling his backpack at the villain's eye with all his might. The villain grunted in surprise, momentarily distracted as it recoiled from the unexpected attack. It was enough to give the trapped child a moment of respite. Izuku didn't hesitate. With a burst of determination, he dashed forward, reaching out to help the child escape the villain's clutches. But the sludge villain was relentless, its form shifting and oozing, making it impossible for Izuku to get a solid grip. Haken. Izuku called out, desperation seeping into his voice. What the hell, why are you here? Demanded Bakugou, the boy who had been bullying him ever since he was a child, his voice a mix of surprise and frustration. I don't know, my legs just started moving. Izuku shouted back, his mind racing as he struggled against the villain's hold. The chaos around them seemed to fade into the background as Izuku focused all his energy on freeing Bakugou. Every fiber of his being screamed at him to retreat, to leave this to the professionals. But he couldn't ignore the instinct driving him forward, the need to protect, to save. As the situation grew more dire, Izuku's thoughts flashed back to the words of doubt and discouragement he'd faced. But amidst the chaos, one memory stood out, clear and unwavering: the stranger who had called him a hero. I couldn't just watch you die. Izuku exclaimed, his voice tinged with determination and desperation, tears mingling with sweat on his face. He knew he wasn't a hero, not in the traditional sense. But in that moment, he couldn't stand by and do nothing. The sludge villain, infuriated by Izuku's persistence, launched a vicious attack. But before it could strike, a voice cut through the chaos from above. So that's what all the fuss was about, a new figure said, landing beside Izuku and Bakugou. Izuku's eyes widened in disbelief as he looked up to see Monkey D. Luffy, the infamous vigilante, standing before him with a carefree grin. You did great, Mosshead. I'll take it from here, Luffy said, his smile genuine as he turned his attention to the sludge villain. Wow, you're really ugly, do you poop? He said, laughing as the heroes were unsure if they were gonna try and catch him or tell him to beat the villain already. Which someone in the crowd screamed. Straw Hat. The heroes can't defeat him. So please. Then Luffy got up from the floor laughing as his hand hardened and turned black. The sludge monster was ready to attack Luffy. But then he said loudly. Gum Red Hawk, he said as flames came from his fist. As he hit the sludge, the heroes protected the citizens from the impact. All of the people were in shock. Relief flooded through Izuku as he watched Luffy effortlessly deal with the threat in his unserious manner. It was like watching a comedy show about a hero in action, fearless and unyielding, but yet funny and amusing. But the danger passed, Izuku's legs finally gave out, leaving him kneeling on the ground, exhausted but overwhelmed with emotion. He had faced his fears, confronted the doubts that plagued him, and in that moment, he felt a glimmer of hope. Can I become a hero? Izuku whispered, his voice barely audible amid the chaos. Luffy turned his head toward him, raising an eyebrow and offering a reassuring smile. Aren't you already a hero? Luffy replied, the exact same words he said more than 10 years ago. In that moment, Izuku felt a weight lift from his shoulders. The heroes moved in to apprehend Luffy, but he escaped. A while later, Izuku Midoriya walked home with a heavy heart, replaying the day's events in his mind. The chaos, the terror, and most of all, the overwhelming realization of his powerlessness. As he neared his neighborhood, he heard familiar footsteps behind him. Hey Deku. Bakugou's voice rang out, dripping with disdain. Izuku turned to face him, seeing the anger and frustration etched on his rival's face. You think you're some kind of hero now, huh? Bakugou snarled, his eyes blazing with fury. Don't ever help me again, you quirkless loser. I don't need your pity. He spat the words out like venom, leaving Izuku standing there, hurt and confused as Bakugou stormed off. Izuku's shoulders slumped as he continued his walk home. His mind raced with thoughts of what had happened. I wanted to apologize to All Might, but no matter where I looked, he was nowhere to be found. I can always try to send a message through his website when I get home, he thought to himself, trying to find some solace in the plan. Just as he was lost in his thoughts, All Might came barreling around the corner. I am here. All Might's booming voice startled Izuku, causing him to jump back in surprise. All Might? Where did you come from, and how are you in that form? Izuku asked, bewildered by the sudden appearance of his idol in his muscular form. Nothing can weaken me, because I am All Might. Sentence was cut short by a violent cough, and he suddenly reverted to his weakened state, blood spraying from his mouth. Izuku's panic subsided as All Might coughed and caught his breath. The alley fell silent, the tension hanging thick in the air. Finally, All Might broke the silence, his voice softer, but still carrying a weight of sincerity. Young man, I wanted to thank you and also discuss your question from before, All Might began, his eyes meeting Izuku's with genuine gratitude. If it wasn't for you, that poor kid would have died from suffocation. So thank you. Izuku shook his head vehemently, tears welling up in his eyes. No, it was my fault to begin with. I got in the way of your hard work. I wasted your energy, not to mention I wasn't the one who saved him. All Might raised a hand to stop him. I'm not done, he said firmly. You told me you didn't have a power, but when I saw this timid quirkless boy try to save a life, it made me feel guilty for not acting. Honestly, I'm not even worthy of being called the symbol of peace. A short pause followed as Izuku absorbed All Might's words. His mind flashed back to his mother's tearful apology, I'm sorry Izuku. I wish things were different, and then to the words of the Straw Hat Man, aren't you already a hero? Those were the words he had always longed to hear, and hearing them from All Might now made his heart ache with a mixture of pain and joy. There's a story about every hero how they became great. But most have one thing in common. Their bodies moved before they had a chance to think. Almost on their own, All Might continued, his voice filled with admiration. Izuku's tears began to flow freely again. The emotions were too much to contain. He clenched his heart, feeling the profound impact of All Might's words. The validation he had sought for so long, from both his mother and the Straw Hat Man, now echoed in the words of his greatest idol. And today, that's what happened to you, All Might said gently. Young man, you too can become a hero. Izuku's breath hitched as the weight of those words settled over him. All the years of being told he was worthless, of being bullied and doubted, melted away. His knees buckled and he dropped to the ground, sobbing uncontrollably. Of Kaseki. I feel like I've seen that green-haired kid before. He said as he shrugged it off, thinking he may have had too many drinks. Thanks for watching guys, that's it for today, so hope you enjoyed this video. If you do, please leave a like, share and subscribe. Also don't forget check out our author of this fanfic, link and details in description.